right, so this will be the last little bit of our crop walk for today, but we're going to cover the dwarf sour cherries and then just some general fruit production questions. If anybody has them, please get them ready.
Okay, so this trial was also originally part of that micronutrient, iron chlorosis trial, and there are different varieties here. So this first row is Cupid variety, then I believe it's Valentine, and then the third row is Romeo, and we can walk through there I guess in a bit. So this was also sprayed with Apogee, and I'm not sure what the true effect is on this crop this year, because this was a poor production year for cherries in general, from what I'm gathering from commercial growers talking to me.
Okay.
And part of that was the cold conditions. So in cherries, in general, they have flowers that come out, and they come in bunches of about 5. And so if you had perfect pollination and really good conditions, you would expect 5, a bunch of fruit per flower cluster.
Okay.
But this year we basically only have 1 per flower cluster that's retained. Now that might be an effect of the apogee. Like the apogee might have been causing that abortion. They always talk about June drops, where at a certain stage of development, the plant will decide whether it can carry all of that fruit through to when it's ripe and ready to be harvested. And usually in June, physiologically, they kind of make that decision, and they'll drop some fruit. Now, ideally, you would want to retain all 5 on the cherry. In apples, you remove some of the fruit so that it sizes up. And in this case, this year, we applied Apogee, and we've only got 1 fruit per cluster. So is that an effect of the Apogee, or is it from the cool winter conditions where maybe some of those flowers were more challenged, or maybe the trees in general were more challenged this year? I don't have an answer to that, but we'll look at it. One of the things about when you have 1 fruit as opposed to 5, in general, they should size up larger. And so that's, in practice, apple producers would only retain 1 apple per 6 inches of branch length. Now in cherries, usually they can sustain more and still get good production. But we'll see, since it's only got 1 per sort of 6 inch of branch length, we may get superior fruit this year with higher sugar content, because all of those resources get distributed to the fruit eventually, right? So we'll see. It may be that Apogee is the part of the reason why it has done this, and maybe we're going to get super good fruit quality. I don't know yet, because this is the first year of the trial, but we'll look at that. The other thing that it does is it prevents certain diseases, and in Saskatoon berries, I'm looking at that sort of thing, because it has a physiological effect on the plant, and it reduces elongation. So you can see this is the new growth. You can see the green tissue is this year's growth. Beyond that is from prior years. So it's got a half decent amount of new growth that's come from here. But again, relatively sparse fruit on there. So a good amount of leaf to fruit ratio to supply, phytonutrients to that fruit. We'll see how well it does. It's supposed to reduce disease, so I haven't treated these with any fungicides or anything. So we'll see if it had an effect on brown rot that I mentioned earlier. We have had rains. I didn't notice brown rot in here affecting the fruit. So typically what you'd see is, for example, where you had a cluster of 5 fruit, and if brown rot infected it, then that would just blight out, and you'd lose all of those flowers, and there'd be nothing there. These ones, it doesn't appear that they're affected by brown rot. There's no little spots or twigs that are blighted out. Like in brown rot, it would be retained on the plant. You would see blighted little twigs that are retained on the new growth or in this area. So we don't have that. It may be that apogee is negatively inhibiting, inhibiting the spread of that disease. I don't know, but it's something that if we don't see any brown rot in here, it was here last year at a fairly high level, so it should be here this year. And there's portions of this that weren't treated using apogee, so we can look at that and compare the treated part to the untreated part to see what the differences are as far as disease goes. Okay. So that's this one. This again is Cupid. So this typically had higher sugar content than the other varieties, and last year I think it had the highest sugar content compared to the other two varieties. These, I should talk about dwarf sour cherries and where they come from.
And so is sugar content something that you measure when you do all the yields, and that contributes to what producers want to?
Well, and so this brings me back to talking about the sort of origins of dwarf sour cherry and what they are, because there are different sort of genetic components of the cherry spectrum of plants. So there's Prunus avium, which is your sweet cherries, I should say. Okay. And sweet cherries grow to be a large plant, and they aren't as hardy. So in general, they don't survive in Saskatchewan. They would die over winter, and we can't really effectively grow them here. Dwarf sour cherries were bred using Prunus fructicosa, which is Mongolian sour cherry. So it came from Russia, and they're very dwarf. Like they only grow 3-4 feet tall, super hardy, but the fruit quality wasn't very good. And then there's Prunus cerasus, which is the European sour cherry, and those grow to be a tree, better fruit quality, but they're not as hardy. So over the years, people crossed the Mongolian sour cherry, Prunus fructicosa, with the European sour cherry, Prunus cerasus, and they got this hybrid, which are these what we're calling dwarf sour cherries. And so these grow to maybe 10-12 feet tall, and they have better fruit quality than, I would say, better than the European sour cherry or Prunus fructicosa. They have high sugar content as opposed to some of the other sour cherries that don't really have the sugar component of it. It's more the acid. And there's different kinds of cherries. Cherries can be what they call amarel or morello. And amarel is where the flesh doesn't have that red coloring, and morello have that red flesh. So the sour cherries that come from the Michigan area that are Montmorency variety, the European sour cherry, those are amarel. They have a sort of yellowy fleshed consistency on the inside. These have red flesh, so they're morello cherries, and that is associated with high antioxidant levels, different functional components that are really beneficial for your health. And when they look at it, it's really good for people that do long distance athletic events in recovery. Like, it helps you recover, and it also helps with regulating sleep. So it's a good fruit to eat. Those were bred initially at the university, and then Dr. Boers took over the program in 1999, and these were released after that time. The first variety was Carmine Jewel, and then he released what he called the Romance series. And so that's why it's Cupid, Romeo, Juliet, Crimson Passion, and I'm forgetting the fifth one, but there's a question.
Okay. So, what variety of sour cherries has the best flavor?
Has the best flavor? I would say it's probably Crimson Passion, but that's my own bias. It had the highest sugar content, and they were the largest fruit initially in the earlier trials. A lot of the commercial growers have gone with Carmine Jewel. It has a deep red flesh and very consistent production. It has a little different growth habit than a lot of the Romance series that have sort of a lot more elongated limber branches. This one sort of branches out a little bit more. So it has a slightly different growth habit. Doesn't generally grow as tall. Production is quite consistent. And I know from some commercial growers this year, they found that the Carmine Jewel is producing at a higher level than, for example, Valentine, that seemed to suffer with this past winter a little bit more. So it's more consistent, and the flavor is still really good. You can't describe it on TV, but it has that true cherry flavor that, if you imagine what a cherry should taste like, that's what these sour cherries taste like.
Okay.
So yeah, very good for you, very nice. So yeah. So this variety is, you can see it's growing a little bit more than that one, so it maybe isn't responding quite the same way to apogee. You would expect the plants to maybe have grown half that amount. So for this one, maybe I need to get in here and apply apogee again to see the same sort of benefit. But I kind of want to do just one trial to see consistency, and then I can compare varieties, as opposed to if I add in another application on this one but not that one, then I'm sort of mixing up the treatments. So I might just leave it and see how it is. Okay. But you can see very nice green leaves. They have a different spectrum of requirements for fertilization, and that's one of the difficulties that we've had, is when we try to determine what it needs for nutrients. Generally you'll harvest some leaves, and then you submit those to a lab, and they grind them up and they extract what's in there, and then you can determine, is it absorbing all the nitrogen that it needs? Does it have the iron that it needs? These were showing up with zinc deficiencies, but I did some reading, and in California they found that actually cherries can tolerate much lower levels of zinc than other areas. So zinc might not be as much of an influence on the sour cherries as the other crops, but they definitely do need iron, and so we did apply them with that foliar iron chelate to help them get through that iron chlorosis issue. So, but they seem to be growing fairly nicely now. I don't think, maybe the apogee didn't work as well on this one, but we're still seeing a similar sort of effect with fewer fruit. So again, per cluster, really only one cherry per cluster, in some cases a couple of them. And if we get to come back to this, we can show you in the fall when they ripen up. Some of these are starting to turn a little bit red, and sometimes you'll see fruit that's really quite red at this stage, like this one's a little bit red. That isn't really a ripening fruit per se. They need to expand a lot more.
Okay.
And a lot of people will start calling in mid-July that they see red fruit on the plant, and they say, am I ready to harvest my sour cherries? No, they take a long time. After they've colored up, they'll get a little bit darker, and usually it's not until mid-August that they're ready to actually be harvested. So don't look at your cherries and think just because the fruit is red that it's time to harvest. You have to let them develop their sugar content. So we recommend around mid-August, depending upon the year, and taste them. And if they're really sour, you've harvested them too early. Like, wait until they're in that at least 15 to 16% sugar content. Okay. And some of these go up to like 23% sugar, which is, it's really good in terms of, when you're making wines, that's kind of the level they want, because it's a conversion of sugar to alcohol. Okay. That's the happy medium for wine production. So these make a really nice red colored wine. And there's lots of different products that are made from these. Right. Anyway, I don't know what else.
Nothing else online for sour cherries? How about any just general production? What are you hearing from your clients this time of year?
Well,
what are some of the issues that people are having?
So one of the issues, I got phone calls, I've been getting phone calls for the past several weeks, is, and this relates to cherries, is cherry fruit fly. And so what commercial growers do, you can't have, there's basically a zero tolerance in the trade for having infected fruit. So cherries, what happens is in sort of early July, adult flies start to come out and they'll fly around. After they've been out of the ground and they're flying around for 5 to 10 days, they are sort of fertilized and they can oviposit. So the females will fly to a fruit and they'll puncture the skin and put in a single egg. And they somehow can detect if it's been infected already, so it's usually just one maggot per fruit, but they'll move around pretty quickly through an orchard and infect a bunch of fruit. Obviously we don't want maggots in our fruit,
Right.
so we try to control them. And there's sort of an integrated pest management system that we use for controlling cherry fruit fly. There's different species. There's cherry fruit fly, and then there's black cherry fruit fly, and we tend to get more of the black cherry fruit fly. It has a more northern and western sort of dispersal than the cherry fruit fly is more sort of an eastern species, but we do have them here. It's I think roughly 60% of what we have is black cherry fruit fly, and those come out, you know, in that July period. They start ovipositing. You can attract them to these sticky traps. So what they typically do is have these yellow traps in the orchard, and we usually have a lure, so just a little bag of ammonium carbamate or similar ammonium product, and that releases, you know, that smell, and the flies can detect it, and they'll come to the sticky trap. And then once you detect them, you know that after 5 to 10 days you're going to need to spray to try to control them.
Okay.
And there are different products. There's a host of different insecticides that can be used, and some are sort of organic approved and that sort of thing, and some are more effective than others. But if people want recommendations, they can call me, and I can provide them with specifications about how to apply. But they control that, or they attempt to control that. So that's been something that's been on the plate. And you know, people hear about what's going on in other orchards. So there's some people in the Southwest that had detected cherry fruit fly already. And so some of the people in the Northeast are worried, oh, how come I'm not detecting some? Well, they're a little bit ahead of the Northeast. It's a cooler zone. So you just give it time and you'll probably start to detect them on your sticky traps.
Okay.
And you know, the other question that came up is, do I necessarily have to have a lure? And the answer is no, you don't have to have a lure. You'll still detect them, but at a lower frequency. Right. And if you're really trying to get on top of an insect problem, it's better to get the earliest detection you can. So I recommend using the lures along with the sticky trap to monitor it. And then, you know, spray accordingly and according to recommendations and label requirements.
Right.
Yeah.
How about the forest snake caterpillars? Were they an issue?
They had been in the past few years, and this spring we did have some on the Saskatoons, not so much on the sour cherry. Some people took photos of them and showed that they had migrated onto the Haskap, but I don't think they prefer Haskap. It's got a more pubescent leaf covering, so I don't think it's as neat. They don't like it as much. It's more to chew through to get the same nutrients. But the Saskatoons are these sort of light leaves that I think the nutrients are there for them, and so they munch on them. And yes, we had them in the Saskatoons. It wasn't as bad as the two previous years, like 2016 and the 2017. But yeah, they were still around. In general, what we were able to do here is just cut off the branches when we saw the colonies and remove those, and that controlled it. But if you need to control them, there's a really good, it's organic product too, but it's as good as any of the other chemicals, and that's Dipel. And it sort of gets into it's a BT, Bacteria thuringiensis kurostaki strain. And so when they're eating the leaves, that goes into their gut and it forms a crystal and it sort of kills them that way. So you'll see them all just expire if you treated them with that type. So yeah, I think that's...
Are there any questions online? No questions online? Well, just before we sign off, thank you. But also I just want to confirm that all of the trials that you had talked about are all funded by Adopt?
Adopt, yeah. Ag Demonstrations of Practices and Technology. And so I've been applying for several years. As you can tell, we've been talking about these different programs, and it's been very well received by the commercial growers. We make presentations at their events, and it's very interesting for them to see what can be done. And that's the intent of the program, is to implement new technologies that maybe a grower isn't going to spend the money to do themselves, but if there's something that proves to be really beneficial, then they can see that and they can make the decision whether or not they want to, you know, invest in that. So that's what this is all about.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I guess if anybody has any questions after this, they can contact Forrest directly, or you can contact us in Outlook and we can give Forrest the questions.
So my email address is just my name, so it's forrest.scharf@gov.sk.ca.
Perfect.
Send me an email.
Excellent. And you can get more information on our crop walks by following the hashtag CropWalk18 on Twitter. You can sign up for the crop production newsletter that comes out bi-weekly throughout the growing season, and we write about each crop walk on that, or you can contact us in the Outlook office.